Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Ooh. Yes. Lovely. My name is Susan Hinchcliffe, and I'm a chair of the Transport Committee, a leader of Bradford. And we're here at the Transport Committee this morning, and want to just go through the agenda as it is outlined before you. Just before we start, I just want to say who we are, where we come from, and I'll start right at the end there with Councillor Ross Shaw.
Councillor Ross Shaw, portfolio holder for regeneration, planning and transport on Bradford Council.
Councillor Eric Firth, Kirklees Council, portfolio holder for transport and innumerable other things.
Isaac Wilson, Councillor for Weetwood Ward in Leeds.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Leeds City Council.
Good morning, Councillor Melanie Jones, Wakefield Council.
Right. Councillor Colin Hutchinson from Calderdale.
Councillor Dice Salam, Bradford Council.
Councillor Peter Carlill from Leeds, and I'm Deputy Chair of the committee.
Councillor Manisha Kaushik from Kirklees, and also a Deputy Chair on the Transport Committee.
Ian Power, I'm Governance Services Officer.
I'm Dave Pearson, Director of Transport Operations and Passenger Experience at the Combined Authority.
Hi, I'm Dave Haskins. I'm the Interim Director of Transport Policy and Delivery at the Combined Authority.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Jones and I'm the Interim Head of Transport Policy at the Combined Authority.
Morning, I'm Councillor Jane Scullion. I'm Deputy Leader of Calderdale Council.
Hi everyone, Matthew McLaughlin, Councillor for Colne Valley Ward in Kirklees.
Hello everyone, oh please my voice. Councillor Annie Maloney, I represent Beeston and Holbeck Ward in Leeds.
And before you say anything, Councillor Bolt, can I just welcome Councillor Melanie, because obviously she's new to this committee, so welcome very much representing Leeds Council. So Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Martin Bolt from Kirklees, speaking to you today from somewhere out near Kirks, I think, down here.
Last but not least, Councillor Peter Clark from Bradford.
Lovely, thank you very much, everybody. So now we know all the microphones work as well, so that's been a useful exercise for that as well. Apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies?
Yes, so I've had apologies from Councillor Buckley, Councillor Butt, Councillor De Gaulle, and Namir Hussain, also Councillor Hayden, and well, that's the apologies I've had, and I think there are some extra gaps as well from Councillor Morley and Councillor Caffrey as well.
Okay, lovely.
So. Councillor Caffrey is on a bus somewhere from Halifax.
Oh, so we are expecting him. Okay.
That's lovely.
He's hoping to get it, depends on the bus.
Super, that's great. I think we'll expect him later in the meeting then in that case, thank you. So declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, have we got anything to declare? No, as usual, if you go through the meeting and you discover that there is something, do let us know immediately, and that can be noted. Exempt information, possible exclusion of the press and public. I don't think there is anything in these papers, is there? Not that I remember. No, fine. Councillor Swift is just arriving from Wakefield.
Good morning and my apologies.
Welcome. You're over this side of the table. Minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on 14th of December. Those are in the papers before you. Are there any comments or questions you have on those before we go to seeing whether they're the correct record or not? Councillor Hutchinson.
Item 44, the Chair was requested to write to the Secretary of State expressing our concerns about reductions in staff numbers in stations. I was wondering whether you'd had a reply.
I can't recall. Have we had a reply to that? No, we'll chase that up. Thank you very much for reminding us, Councillor Hutchinson. Anything else? No. Okay, lovely. Well, with that then, if I come and pass those as a correct record of that meeting. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that is carried. So, the first substantive item on the agenda is bus service funding and network plan development update. There's a lot going on, isn't there? So I'll leave the floor to you for the moment, Dave. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. I'll give a brief introduction to the sort of key points in this paper and an update as to where things are, and I'm sure that'll prompt a discussion. So I won't go into reciting everything in the paper. But I think there's three big elements of this paper. And first is commercial bus services and particularly the uncertainty around bus service funding. As we sit in early mid-February, the funding that both bus operators and local transport authorities like Combined Authority has been getting from government to mitigate the impact of the pandemic and the economy situation comes to an end in March, and a week today, bus operators who intend to make changes or reductions in their services must register them and make them formal from next Friday. So we are, as we were at one point last year, facing a bit of a cliff edge. We've had some discussions with bus operators, and those discussions are continuing, and we've had meetings as recently as early this week, and Councillor Carley and I have got a conversation with one of the bus operators immediately after this meeting. So these discussions are still quite going on. But as we sit here, if there's no outcome from government, then we are looking at a raft of commercial bus services. We've summarised the broad numbers for you in this paper in terms of the services at risk of being withdrawn or being reduced or affected, and that's sort of largely 7 whole services, 4 services where the part of the route to be withdrawn, 16 services where service frequencies would reduce, and 15 where some journeys would be taken out in terms of when they what time of day and week they operate. That's a bit of a dynamic list, and is probably slightly changed from the meetings we had earlier this week, but it gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're looking at. So I think the situation really is that government officials are saying they're working on something, but there's nothing forthcoming. And it's interesting that just a day or so ago they sent out some rules to traffic commissioners on how to deal with bus registrations in this situation, which I would suggest that they expect that the deadline of next Friday will be passed before any outcome of any funding. The other indications we've been getting is that if funding is forthcoming, it might be a short extension of the existing arrangements pending something longer term. And I think from both the local government sector and actually the bus operator sector have said, we really need certainty across the whole year to be able to stabilise the situation. So not in a good place really in terms of the implications of that. That then sort of links into the second part of the paper, which deals with the Combined Authorities budget position, which is it's similar in terms of your respective councils as well. So the Combined Authorities budget for bus services is challenged by inflation, as most budgets are, and so that's an issue that we've been dealing with this year. I had to move some money between budgets to address some of those issues. Next year, with the budget that's been set, it does not assume any government funding. So if that comes, then we'll need to change review the budget again. But we're assuming no budget funding. We're assuming the same transport levy. We're also looking at when we have gone out to tender for bus services, we're finding quite significant cost increases, and so that's putting sort of pressure on the Combined Authorities budget to be able to address that. So one of the things we will need to be looking at is value for money of what's paid for, to make sure that it is delivering for communities and it is actually carrying people. We're looking and actively sort of engaging with some specific schools around some school bus services that aren't running very well. In terms of what the number of people using them, we're looking at a number of different aspects about how we do bus tendering as well, to just to make sure that we get the best we can for the money available. In terms of the concessionary fare element, and this is where we, as a combined authority, compensate the bus operators for carrying passengers with the free bus passes, older and people with disabilities. Then we've been artificially paying that at a higher rate over the pandemic, in line with government government advice. The plan for the coming year is to revert to using the actual numbers of people travelling, but also to reflect in the amount we pay to the bus operators the changed economic conditions. So we'll be paying for fewer journeys, but we're probably paying more per passenger journey. But that should get us to a balanced position on that budget. So that sort of sets out the implications of the budget the combined authority approved last week. So hopefully that gives you a bit of background to that. I'm happy to take questions. I think before I leave the budget, I think the other thing I'll just go back to a little bit is the fact that we've got quite a lot of tender services contracts to re-procure over the coming financial year. We've been re-procuring some contracts over the last couple of months. I think, as I mentioned, we've seen significant increases in tender prices. That's probably reflective of the costs. We're also seeing a low level of confidence in bus operators. We do have a situation in the Ilkley, Otley and Guiseley area where we're simply unable to continue to fund the existing services, A, because the bus operators are not willing to bid and take on the contracts, and B, because we're having to sort of match and deal with the inflated costs as well. So, and I'm happy to take questions or if any members in that area want to a conversation with me at the end of the meeting, I'm happy to have that. I think Councillor Thompson's your area, so I'm expecting to have a conversation around that. I think finally in this paper, we do have, and a fortunate compared to some other transport authorities, we did get a good allocation of funding from the Bus Service Improvement Plan. I think one of the things we need to put aside, alongside what I've just told you in terms of the sort of the prevailing winds in terms of bus services and funding, is that we do have some funding to deploy to improve bus services. I think what this report's setting out is how we would intend to spend that money, and there's a chart in Figure 1 that sort of sets out that. And I think as you would probably expect, I think the £3 million sort of allocated for the first phase of that is probably going to be needed to stabilise the bus network and to try and get some level of stability back in, and to do a few things which we've been sort of working through with yourselves and with your respective officers as quick wins before we sort of look at a sort of longer term investment in the network once we've actually got things sort of hopefully stabilised this financial year. So I'll stop there because I think that's I promise not to do too big an introduction, but there are quite a lot of issues and quite a lot to update you on.
Thank you, Dave. So obviously there's a lot there, isn't there? And I think the big standout thing for me that I'm concerned about is these 42 services that are going to be affected by the government's withdrawal of their funding. And I think that is concerning us all. We don't know whether they're going to give us any more funding or give the operators any more funding or not. And that changes from week in, week out. We hear different things coming out of Department for Transport all the time. And this dithering really makes it impossible for us to plan, and actually makes it impossible for customers to know whether they're going to be able to get to school, leisure or work on a regular basis. So it's a real issue for the whole of West Yorkshire, is this. And to have this on the back of the other cuts that happened last year is going to be really, devastating for our local economy. It is very much essential that we have good transport links for economic growth, and we heard this morning that we're not growing as an economy nationally, and things like this really just drag us down, don't they? So I just appeal to government to make sure that they give a proper forward-looking plan how they fund transport in this country going forward, and not just be sort of a hand-to-mouth consideration. And there are other things that I want us to highlight as well as we go through, but I'll just open up to questions, comments. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair. I just did a quick count of how many days there are before the end of March, and there are 48 days. We're here at the 10th of February, and we don't know, and in terms of not just us, but the commercial operators, in terms of them rotating bus drivers, all of those kind of things, whether those bus services are going to be cut or not. And we don't know if the government are going to continue the grant to the bus companies, and it's 48 days. I don't actually see how we, are we going to hear Monday? Are the bus operators going to hear Monday? Are we as a combined authority? How does the news get out in terms of, is the grant going to be extended or not? Are these cuts going to take place or not? Is it sort of like choosing a new pope? Is smoke going to come up from the department? 48 days, and that's including weekends. It just seems extraordinary. It's almost unbelievable that we're in this position. And I don't often say this, but I feel for Arriva and Preston and the other bus companies, because they don't know where they're going to be in 48 days. So it isn't just the combined authority, it's the public generally making their plans, but it's also the bus operators. It's not acceptable.
Absolutely, I'll take it. There's a few more people indicating. I'll take those before I go back to Dave. Councillor Swift.
Yes, slightly like Councillor Scullion. I don't normally feel a massive amount of sympathy for Arriva, but the way in which the government's doing it, by just waiting till the last minute to do whatever they might or might not do, I can half understand why Arriva jumped the gun, some months ago, and brought in large-scale cutbacks in Wakefield and indeed in Kirklees. But the best advice I thought that was given to the government came from that well-known socialist bunch, the National Infrastructure Commission, which is a wing of the Treasury. And they've, in one of their reports just before Christmas, they very explicitly said that given the actual nature of the recovery from the pandemic, or slow and uncertain recovery, that the tack the government should take in terms of the revenue aspects of transport operation was that they should accept that there would be a period of time when there would be a desirable need for additional support, so that public transport didn't get into the vicious spiral that cutbacks mean that even less passengers find the services acceptable. And they were making it explicit. They said, from a point of view of climate change and from the point of view of the economy, we need public transport to be operating at a better level than it is at the moment in the future. And that it simply did not make sense to allow it to descend into a crisis and have to be rescued later. And they were explicitly saying to government that it made good sense in terms of value for money to actually substantially support public transport, bus and rail at the moment, so that it could actually provide a better return to the country in the longer term. As I say, a very, very dry outfit, an offshoot of the Treasury, and not for any kind of fine social reasons, but for very solid reasons against the government's climate change objectives and against the economic objectives, just to accept that there was a period when it was going to need more money for everybody's sake.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Yes, it's just economic common sense, isn't it, really? Councillor Salam?
Thanks, Chair. I think, Jane, we're hoping that it's not going to be the 2 days after the deadline, like we had last time. I think that's where, that's what happened to us last time. I mean, the problem that I have also is that we've seen some increases in passengers in the last, quarter or 2 quarters, and especially the mayor's fares have actually also impacted on that. Where we are seeing more young people getting on with the £2.50. We've got more £2.50 My Days now being sold than ever before. We're seeing the £2 fares actually, that revenue going up quite significantly. But the problem on the other hand is that the operators are not sure whether there's going to be any funding or not. But at the same time, the people working in the industry are also not sure whether they're going to have a job at the end of. I mean, with the Otley and Ilkley services being reduced by Transdev or not, being taken up, I think there's going to be compulsory redundancies over there, which I've never heard of in my 37 years in the bus industry. In the same way, the reliability for passengers is paramount, it's important, and I always talk about that. Affordability at the moment is good, but the problem that we've got is that if established drivers are leaving and new drivers are coming in, it takes time for the new drivers to actually, learn every single route to get accustomed to the job. So therefore, there's only certain amount of work that is given to those new entrants, and the rest of the work is being taken by established drivers. And if those drivers are now, especially people coming to end of shelf life, are actually, seriously considering taking their pension, and they have taken their pensions. And there was a massive demand for part-time working, especially people who were in the LGPS, because either you had to reduce your hours or you had to reduce your pay, and most people preferred reducing hours. So therefore, there was still that skill set in the industry, but now people are considering seriously to go. And, I mean, establishments in the West Yorkshire, in the first group, I would say Bradford, Halifax, Bradford and Huddersfield are quite established at this moment in time, and the establishment is good. Whereas Leeds and Halifax, the establishment is not to the point where it's needed. So therefore, even the people in the industry are actually now thinking whether should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? When the crisis happened with people leaving the industry and going to trucks and other, like service industries, is because they thought the pay was good over there. But that's going to also have an impact on. I always say this: there's no shortage of drivers. There's shortage of good jobs, and decent jobs. There are people there that still want to drive, but they don't want to leave themselves vulnerable to the fact that whether they're going to have a job after 31st of March or not.
It's planning at all levels, isn't it? None of us can work on, 2 days later, things are overturned. It's just got to have a long future, sustainable planning. That's any business would do the same. Councillor Carlo.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to add to Jane's point, really, of saying that, well, that's 40-something days. Sorry, was it 48? You said I haven't done the counting, but actually, more realistically, it's 7 days, because that's when the bus operators have to announce by law to the Traffic Commissioner what they intend to do at the end of March. And really looking at that, the uncertainty that we've been talking about, that's all the operators are talking to me about, it's all the Combined Authority are talking about. But then if you're a driver on those buses, if you're a passenger on those buses, that uncertainty is big as well. Because, I mean, we're trying to sell annual passes, but you don't even know if you can buy a monthly pass at the moment based on whether you're going to be able to get to work or not. So the real irony of this situation is this is the week that I think I saw that Dublin, who have been doing a lot of work looking at how they redesigned their bus network, where they got quite a substantial amount of funding from government, announced that they've gone to beyond 100% of pre-COVID patronage this week. And therefore, if you do invest in it, it's possible and it can come. And in fact, in Dublin, they've shown that, and across many other cities. I think I saw Spain as well. This was the week that they went beyond pre-COVID patronage. So it's really disappointing that we're looking at this again, when for lots of places they're coming out of it and seeing that growth, and that uncertainty being still around this time is just a real shame.
It just shows it can be done, can't it? And also we're at 87% of pre-pandemic levels, and we have ambitions to get to the same kind of level as Ireland is talking about, but we do need that funding. Councillor Bolt?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the situation of planning has been mentioned. And throughout this, I think I feel sorry for the bus drivers, Arriva and others. The planning issues, Arriva have been critical of local authorities, Kirklees, Leeds and West Yorkshire, saying they can't run bus services while local authorities are digging up roads. The planning issue is for the A62, which they've been very critical of. That's been in the pipeline for several years, Eric. Major works, they're Tillman Roadworks with a major highway redesign. I'd be interested to know what Arriva bosses respond to public consultation for the likes of A62 and Cooper Bridges, because if it's affecting the bus service for the 48 weeks that Kirklees are doing Leeds Road, why isn't the planning in place from Arriva to try and amend bus services? Yes, you will hit delays as you've got down here on Whitehall Road, but if the majority of the bus route could be operated by short form services starting at other places, and as I say, when Kirklees come out of the A62 works, it won't be long before we start Cooper Bridge.
Probably several years.
Well, they were talking about 24 when that was starting, but there should be planning on that. So for the majority of a bus service, they could run a reliable service and people would have the confidence. And it's one of the things, I don't know how much influence or interaction we have as a combined authority with them, to suggest that they look at rejigging their services so that people, you don't get to Cooper Bridge and you get 3 buses going along the A62 altogether. Those are phased. And I mean, I'd issue a challenge that I gave to Arriva and the combined authority before. Next time we have a meeting of this authority, if the combined authority, the mayoral authority and Arriva come and stand on Leeds Road at Murfield and get on the 229 and come into this meeting on the service that's scheduled to get here just before 10 o'clock, I'll set off from my house on a push bike and we'll see who'll get here first. Because I'm sure it won't be Arriva. And it's one of the things we talk in the report about funding quick wins. I wonder whether we can influence bus services to try and give reliability so that people who have to come in from Heckmondwike, Murfield, Gildersome, etc., can try and come in on a bus. Because when you get the situation, and there's the Whitehall Road, if people are stuck at the end of Reedman's and that coming in there, it takes ages to get into the city centre, and that's when it builds up delays. So yeah, I think we ought to be looking at. The report also talks about a long list of routes, and I wonder if those can be made available to members under confidential cover, so that at least we know what's happening in our areas. Thank you.
So obviously the roadworks are planned to actually increase the bus services and help the bus services, so all companies should see them as a long-term investment in our bus infrastructure, because obviously we need buses to be able to get around for them to be efficient and to hold more passengers. But Councillor Firth, you wanted to come in there?
Yes, yeah, just touching on some points that Martin made, some very valid, some perhaps not. But the A62 will be finished in March, I've been assured. And they're on it. It's a major piece of roadworks. I don't know if anybody knows the A62 going in Huddersfield, and which has been extended because they found a huge steward and because of the university extension, but that's prolonged it. Under the points previously made about the dire situation about funding, getting back to the real point, are we just sat here, I presume we're not, just waiting with bated breath for the announcement from government, or are we speaking to them, Chair? Is our mayor speaking to them? Or, yes?
Yeah, I'm going to bring Dave and myself in when we've had all comments, but yes is the answer to that.
And just one further point about tender fares. In the not too distant past, we used to have smaller operators clamouring for tender fares and to get into the bus supply chain. Is there a problem? Do we not have a great number of private operators these days, David?
So I'll bring Councillor Thompson, then we'll go back to Dave, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think our bus users just feel completely powerless because they've got unreliable services that are under threat. And as Dave said, we're set to lose vital local connections in a week because nobody's stepped up, and Transdev, who are usually seen as the reliable option locally, are walking away. And then people wonder why we're not doing anything and what's going wrong, and it's incredibly frustrating to know. So I think what I'd like to really think about is what we can do, where we can put that pressure on, because this week's just been exhausting. People want me to rescue the bus services, and I wish I could, but I literally don't know what to do at this point. But we need a real focus on where we put the pressure on, how we force the government to do something for once and actually step up for the people they're supposed to be serving, because it's just beyond ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tunstall. I'll go back to Dave and I'll take Councillor Hutchison and Councillor Lamb after that. So first of all, obviously the Mayor, as Chair of the M10 of the Mayors, has had conversations and meetings with ministers about this, and also a letter has gone from the Northern Mayors, I believe, to government, which we're waiting a response from. So rest assured, we're all doing everything we can to lobby. Is there any information coming out of DFT that you can share with the public at the moment?
I think in terms of the funding announcement, I think that the problem that the officials have is that government want to make decisions about this sort of thing in the context of this sort of spring budget spending review, and that those, and I'm not close to the time scales for how they make those decisions, but that will happen in March, and this bus issue needs to be resolved ahead of March. So I think that's the challenge they've got, and that's why it wouldn't be a surprise to see something come forward as a 3-month extension of what's there now. But that just really moves the problem downstream, unless in the spring budget there is a 1-year sort of funding package that comes through, which is essentially where, and you do get a little bit of well, we're trying our best, but from government officials, because I think genuinely the Department for Transport does not want to create this situation, and their officials are seeking to avoid it. But government sort of works in a slightly different way in terms of Treasury and their sign off of funding. So I think that's what's going on there. So we may hear something, but my sort of assumption is it's a sort of status quo maintaining issue. If I sort of picking on one or two other points that members have made, I think Councillor Firth, you asked, we are talking to the bus operators. We have got lists of what they're thinking about, and working through those lists, and I think Councillor Hinchley, you circulated some detail as well to council leaders as well in terms of what's going on. So to a certain extent, we're sort of grappling with what bus operators might do. At a point this time next week, their intentions will be made clear, and obviously that's something which we will share when we're able to. In that sense,
because that list isn't finalised yet,
it
is it?
isn't,
So
no.
we don't want to frighten communities who may not be
No.
affected.
And also, self and colleagues and Councillor Carlisle as well in these meetings, we've asked questions around those lists and the details, and I think it's fair to say that some of the things on those lists are things which are not necessarily just dependent upon this funding announcement. There are things that the operators feel that they need to do because demand has changed, and I think Councillor Salam, you mentioned this, is that what we are seeing is that what took place in sort of 2021 into 22 was that service frequencies on the busier routes were reduced because of driver shortages, and also because at the time the patronage wasn't back. A lot of that patronage is back now, and there's some routes actually are suffering overcrowding at certain times of the day and week, where understandably there is a need to put some buses back onto those routes, but also the operators will not sort of have the capacity just waiting to do it, and that's where they start looking at some of the marginal services. And I think the sort of recurring theme here is that there are some services that aren't generating the passenger revenue to be sustainable in the longer term on a commercial basis. And at each round of this funding, those services emerge as being the ones at risk. Councillor Firth asked a question there about small bus operators, and I think that's one of the root causes of the issues we're facing in the Gaisley, Eden and Otley areas, is that the confidence of small, medium-sized enterprises and every SME bus operator is slightly different business, and I think their confidence is really low at the moment. And this funding issue, they are more vulnerable than the big operators to fluctuations in fuel prices as well. They don't hedge their fuel like the big bus operators do, and a sort of revolving door of drivers and staff is impacting on them as well. So I think Councillor Firth you probably alluded to, because we've been in a slightly different place before, where we've actively encouraged small bus operators into particularly doing services under contract with a combined authority, because it's a good stable piece of work for them as a contract, and it sort of gives flexibility, and it just feels like we just don't have that flexibility at the moment, and I think that's and that's simply the situation that Councillor Thompson mentions in the local service that links the estates in Gaisley and Eden into the shopping areas. That's a small local service that traditionally has been done by small bus operators, SMEs, and they haven't bid for it. And we changed the tender so that you could fit it around a school bus, and they still didn't bid for it. So, and that's sort of, we'll have another go, absolutely, but it's probably not worth having another go until we know what this funding situation is. I think finally, just to cover Councillor Bolt's point around roadworks generally, I think the big scheme roadworks, like the ones just outside of here and Whitehall Road, I know for a fact that there is a monthly meeting that the bus operators are part of, and that the council, and I'm sure the situation is the same on the S62. The council have made modifications to address some of the issues. I think that the challenge from the bus operator's point of view is, if you actually want to do that, sort of change the whole service pattern a little bit in response to that, they'd say, well, that probably needs, we need 3 extra buses to do that. So who pays for that? Because that, and we hear that from bus operators all the time. Yes, we could do all sorts of things, but we're going to have to employ some more drivers and put some more buses on. And I'm not necessarily suggesting this is needed in every case, but perhaps if we want a gold standard public transport service maintained, and we're doing a major infrastructure project, then maybe that money needs to be found in that sort of sense, because the bus operators won't take that risk, and they tell us that frequently.
Thank you. So, obviously, I think what the mayors are talking about is having a London-style kind of financial settlement with the region for buses, and that's what we'd like. London has that, why can't we have it? It's not to denigrate what London have got, we're pleased they've got that, but actually it needs to be replicated throughout the country in a devolved style. The list is going to be circulated shortly, subject to operators' conversations, because that's not finalised yet. And I think also in the paper it talks about BSIP, and obviously we've talked before about BSIP being used to expand networks, to try new things, and to really start to drive up patronage. And unfortunately, given the conversation we just had, that BSIP money might not be able to be used in such as ambitious way as we had envisaged, and that is disappointing. Councillor Hutchison, you want to come back in?
Thank you. The bus service improvement plan has a welcome emphasis on services through evenings and early morning and weekends, and also to serve the more deprived communities within our boroughs. But the concern is that the discussions that have been taking place about service reductions seem to target exactly those services, the early morning and evening services, and we know, and to serve some of the more deprived areas in our boroughs. And we know that these are the areas that the workforce for our social care and our health services come from. And these are 24/7 services. So these are struggling with recruitment and retention of staff particularly, and any reduction of the ability of staff to actually get to their work is only going to exacerbate that. So I do hope that those factors are being borne very much to the front in discussions with bus service operators.
It goes a little bit to the point Councillor Salam was making earlier about, people need certainty of employment, and also the operators who said this before as well, they need to be more flexible in their employment. Some people can work evenings, can work part-time, and then it will be a more attractive proposition for people, because you're right, a lot of the services that have been cut over the years have been the evening ones, and actually we need those now because obviously the market has changed. So there's lots to do, but you need the money to be able to do that and to keep dual running in place. Councillor Salam and then Councillor Swift.
Sorry, Chair, just wanted to comment quickly. I think it's what Eric was saying. If we're having conversations with the government, then we need to actually, and Colin was saying that we need to bring some of the things to the front of the discussions. One of those is air quality. Investment in new buses have been halted because first we were told that the manufacturers couldn't actually put output enough for what the demand was, and then all of a sudden everything just stopped because the operators are not going to invest into new buses. They'll just carry on with those that they've got, and they'll turn them into Euro 6+. The problem also is that once you lose a route, the operators are not going to park those buses in their yard waiting for the next tender service or an opportunity to run the routes. Once the routes are lost, then the buses are gone. They're scrapped. They don't even sell them to other operators anymore. And there is no spare cover anymore. We used to have 22 to 23% spare cover stood in yards. Now we only have 2 to 3%. And we're in the business of transport. Buses do break down. Buses do have issues, and we have to change them over. The other issue that I also foresee is that what Dave was talking about is some of the small operators that are actually running some of the routes. They're actually hoping at this moment in time that the big operators come and put a bid in to buy them out, because they're just not being able to survive at this moment in time. On the money that they've got, they're just not being able to survive. So they're actually hoping that the big operators would come and actually start having a conversation of taking over their establishment. So I think there are many issues, but at the same time, the government has to be real in investment, in funding, if they want a gold-plated service. Because I don't think we've had a gold-plated service since 1986. That's the problem that we've got. And these are private companies. They've got to look at their profit margins, and that's what worries them, because they've got investors to actually please. They're not bothered about anything else at this moment of time. We're not in the, so therefore there are many issues that the government has to consider if they're serious about public transport.
I mean, I'm not sure we're asking for a gold-plated service, are we? We're just asking for silver-plated, to be quite honest, because from everything, just ordinary, normal service, because what we've been saying this morning, actually, is a very lean operation. What you've been saying about 23% bus capacity, spare bus capacity, now 2%, things are just running at their bare minimum, and any breakdowns anywhere risks tippling things over, doesn't it? So we just want a good basic service, and yes, we aspire for a gold-plated service, but I don't think we're anywhere near that at the moment, tragically. But that's where we as a region want to get to with BSIP, with the mayor's fairs. That's the kind of thing that we want to do to increase patronage, but we do need some long-term sustainable funding. Councillor Swift, do you want to come back?
Following Councillor Hutchinson, Chair, the position of Arriva in Wakefield and to some extent North Kirklees is actually explicitly and overtly upfront to do the things that he's talking about. i.e. explicitly reduce the morning services, explicitly not only reduce the evening services, but start treating 6 o'clock as the beginning of evening, as well as the thinning out of services on the slightly better routes. So it's not just an accident of what's happening in certain cases, that's the kind of hard-nosed operator strategy, exactly in the opposite direction to our stated strategies.
Not necessarily conducive to increased patronage and in profits. I quite understand that. Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. Just a short point. Obviously, we're all very concerned and critical of operators. Where are they today? Do they need a gilt-plated invitation to come, or can they and should they attend to hear what the committee have got to say?
So they've been quite recently to see us, haven't they, and answer questions. But today, I'm afraid, we could do with the government there to ask them what they're doing about the money going forward for the bus service recovery grant. That's who we need to ask the questions of today. And of course, they're not here because the decisions are made in Westminster and not in West Yorkshire. And that's what I think we all agree on. We need more decisions and more funding devolved here so we can make the decisions so that they don't have to. They don't have to travel on a bus from Murfield to Leeds. But you do, and therefore you've got a much better understanding of how that money should be spent than they have. So I'd like to see more Westminster politicians getting out into regions like ours and understanding what life is like on the ground. So that's who I'd like to see today. Any more questions, comments? Because obviously just looking at recommendations. One of the recommendations, 10.2, is about the deployment of funds set aside for the Bus Service Improvement Plan Award. Obviously, at the moment, it's a general approach there. Just asking for us if we're happy with that, because we're now going to proceed to strategic outline business case. Of course, it's difficult to proceed with this without knowing what's going to happen next Friday. And I think it's all chicken and egg, isn't it, really?
It is, although in some respects, what we can still do is we can still move through the process of saying, well, actually, the need to spend this money is even greater. We don't necessarily need to have exactly what we're spending it on for that particular process, but I think what we would want to do is bring back to get us to a position by the end of March, notwithstanding the government position, of having a clear plan as to what we're going to do with that first year's money. So I think it's difficult because it is chicken and egg, but it's also necessary that if we're going to get some value out of this funding to add back into the bus network and to address the issues that members are making here, we sort of need to be in a position to start the process of actually procuring services and putting them on later on the year. So at some point we will need to crystallise this into a list of what that money is going to be spent on, and obviously share that with members in due course.
And indeed, the next paper talks a little bit about that as we prepare forward. But is everybody happy with those two recommendations? I propose those. If everybody's happy to support those, please, those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. Moving now on to then the Bus Service Improvement Plan and Mayor's Big Bus Chat updates. Dave?
Okay, this sort of follows on from the first report, really, in terms of Bus Service Improvement Plan. And looks at that programme in a little bit wider than just what we would spend in terms of the bus network. And so what we're seeking to do here really is firstly to remind you in 2.5 as to what the broad blocks of spending for the Bus Service Improvement Plan are, and in Table 2 the sort of key deliverables that are sitting underneath that. I think the first thing we did with this funding, in fact we did it ahead of the government announcement of the funding, was to introduce the Mayor's Fares back in September. We now have a full 3 months data to be able to share with you, which we do in 2.11. I think Councillor Slam's already alluded to. We are seeing some levels of patronage growth in the sort of final quarter of 2022, and that I think is partly due to both the reduced cost, but also the simplicity, I think, of fares has always felt to be important, so that people knew exactly what they're paying. So I think the other thing is, it is quite noticeable that we've, if you look at the number of the amount of money people have saved, on average each passenger saved 20%, and across the piece over that 3 months we sort of calculated that the passengers saved 3.6 million, and obviously there's a benefit in terms of the cost of living that people are facing at the moment. I think it also sort of illustrates a shift in terms of how people are buying tickets, and we're seeing quite a lot more people buying the multi-operated £4.50 ticket to make multiple journeys, and I think that's one thing we'll probably see going forward. I think what we also have seen, and this is partly due to changes in commuting patterns, is fewer people buy longer term season tickets because they don't necessarily come to travel 5 days a week in the way in which some people used to. So I think that gives you an update. We'll keep you updated as we get more figures. We've got to bring forward to you the release of the funding for the second year of this initiative, and one of the things we are looking at now is that as this starts to develop and grow patronage, then to a certain extent the benefits of that flow through to the bus operators, and should therefore reduce the amount of public funding that supports it, and that's the cycle we're trying to create. The second part of this report deals with the fairly major public engagement that was carried out last summer, the Mayor's Big Bus Chat, which was a range of different engagement activities, and we've sort of pulled together some of the key findings of that, and we're just finalising the detailed reports, and they'll be on the Combined Authorities website, and we'll send you a link so you can look at that in detail in a matter of weeks. But just to sort of pull out in 2.24 and 2.25 sort of key messages, very much validates the approach that's taken with the bus service improvement plan, is in that value for money on fares, managing disruption and delays. We've already talked about that a little bit this morning, and top priorities for is interesting in the context that we see a lot of people wanting to protect their bus service from further reductions, and more evening services, which sort of reflects what Councillor Hutchinson and others were saying earlier, has a lot of support to it. And there's 3/4 of people also feel altering the road to give buses more priority, and they give that support. So what we've set out for you in table 3 on 2.27 is basically how those key feedback themes correlate with the plans that are in the bus service improvement plan. So I'll stop there, and we can take any questions that members have around that.
First of all, on the Mayor's fares, I mean, a positive there, that obviously it has increased patronage, we think, and it's also saved people, is it 3.4 million?
That's right, yes. And I think we need to take a sort of rolling view of the increasing patronage, because it's quite difficult to know what you're comparing with, having had 3 years of quite a sort of unusual set of circumstances. But I think we are seeing growth, and obviously that's something we will track and keep you advised of.
But obviously in very difficult circumstances this year, it has provided £3.4 million worth of benefits to the people of West Yorkshire who've obviously been living through a cost of living crisis, so that's a good benefit for them. Obviously we'd like to see the same thing as Ireland, where it's been 101% increase, but that's going to take quite a lot of investment, as we've already discussed in the previous item. I've got Councillor Jones and Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Point 2.30, informing a customer charter. Is this measurable, and if so, how?
I'll sort of tee it up for a conversation perhaps in the next meeting, because we'll bring the customer charter back. But in a lot of the measurable things are things which we're monitoring against the bus service improvement plan anyway, and punctuality, reliability, bus passenger numbers. We also are with Transport Focus, who the sort of national customer advocate for public transport users, or transport users generally, do a very specific survey on bus users, and are actually doing that now. And that's a national survey, so we spend a modest amount of money topping that up, so we get a good sample size in West Yorkshire, and we can use it for this. And that's very much a customer sentiment type of survey, but it gives you into some of the sort of detailed aspects of the bus experience to be able to measure things against, and that's something we have in hand, and obviously we have reported back to this committee and will continue to do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It does need to be measurable, but we'll bring you a little bit more detail around the customer charter at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We'll look forward to that. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. One of the key parts of this is improving passenger experience at the bus stop. Some of the things that come up in my area around this are accessing bus stops, so where they're, for example, on a busy road but there's no pedestrian crossing to get there for some distance. Also, markings around bus stops in terms of saying it's a bus stop, so cars or vans don't park in the bus stop, stopping the bus getting to it. And then related to that, where you've got the curb that's too low, which means that when people can't get off the bus, so if a bus is pulled up just in front of the bus stop, and there's somebody who's using some kind of mobility aid, can't get off there because the curb's too low. So I think all of those issues are technically within the domain of the transport team, in my case at Leeds City Council. But is there anything? I think those are probably, apart from bus shelters, they're probably the biggest things that impact experience at a bus stop. So what can we do on a West Yorkshire level about that? Can we work with the districts to do some of those things, share funds, whatever it is? I'll just mention a couple more things quickly, if that's okay. Another one is at bus stops. I don't think I've ever seen a very clear notice about how to complain about mixed buses or bus services in any way. And obviously one of our mantras is complain, 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 because we want the bus services to know where there are problems, and people also are entitled to get a voucher or whatever it is if there's a problem. So can something we do at bus stops be have really clear messaging about how to complain? Is that something that's on the agenda? Seems like an easy win, and I'd like that as soon as possible, a big poster or something at each bus stop. And then just the last one, sorry, ghost buses. It meant that you sent around a really helpful report about this, about what's been done on it, and it was very clear about the problems, and it mentioned the working group, which is good, and I guess that's one thing we can helpfully do. But have we had any firmer commitments, and in particular I'm interested in First Bus, about what they're doing to improve the sort of data issues there? Because I understand sometimes there's service cancellations, but the classic is people it just disappearing a couple of minutes in, and that has to be about data, not about cancellations, I guess. So where have we got some sort of roadmap from them about when that specific issue is going to be sorted? Because I've had commitments from them before, and they've proven to be optimistic.
And some of that, I just wonder if we might tackle in the Levelling Up Fund element later in the agenda, because some of that is around bus stops, isn't it? So perhaps some of that will come up later. Is that right?
Yes. I think we can cover what the Levelling Up Fund can do in terms of helping bus stops. I think Councillor Wilson makes a good point there in terms of this a high level of collaboration between the local highways teams and ourselves as a transport authority. is what's needed around bus stops, because the issues are not about what necessarily just about whether there's a bus shelter there, or it's about how the highway around and the walking infrastructure around sort of relates to it. So there's the Levelling Up Fund and other funds can address some of that, but some of it's actually quite hyper local stuff around yellow lines and about sort of how the immediate vicinity of the stops impact it. I think on the ghost buses, on the issue on real-time information, I think in this very room perhaps or building, the working group actually met earlier this week with bus operators. I think as we set out now, the solutions to these things are quite complex. One of the first things we need to do is make sure that when a bus operator cancels a service, they actually go into the system and do that, because some of the problems are that they don't do that, and the system still thinks the bus is out there when it's not. But there's also some data and some functionality issues. So there's a range of different actions that are taking place. So assure you that there's quite a lot of focus on this, because as a committee and as a transport authority, we spent an awful lot of money on that system, and so we want to get it right, and it's also very important for customers. So. And yeah, we'll take that way. I think that's come up at several meetings in terms of visibility of how to complain and how to sort of follow up at any particular issues people have got on bus services. We'll take that away as part of the customer charter piece and particularly how we communicate that. So we'll hopefully address that at the next meeting as well.
Right, they've got a few people indicating. I'm going to take a few in a row now. So Councillor Swift, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Bolt.
Yes, Chair. First of all, if we at some point can we come back to this Ghostbust issue? I don't mean today, but sometime when we can spend about 20 minutes on it, because find it very, very difficult to explain to constituents. Very difficult. But more widely, and again echoing, the way that 2.25 spells out an awful lot of the things that we've been saying around this table. I am a bit worried that we are drifting towards an acceptance of the operator's preferred core network and core services. We've yet to see I think what was previously referred to as the sustainable network, which was the phrase used about 18 months ago when we were going into the BSIP. That's not seen the light of day yet. And certainly the reference here to bus network plan, again, the words appear there, but certainly we've yet to see anything, which obviously from where we're sitting, confirms the apprehension that we're possibly going somewhere that we don't really want to go. Yeah, that's it, Chair. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Before I move on, I'll just go to Councillor Carlo. I think I had some answers to your question.
Sorry, yeah, I was going to come in on that point and the previous point, I guess, about the ghost buses. I thought it was useful to relate it to the last item, actually. One point is, this isn't exclusive to West Yorkshire, so and that's what we hear, but the reason it's coming to a head so much now is that it is the reliability of the services that is key to that. So it can happen when a bus may break down and therefore isn't able to continue the rest of its route. It can happen when there's not a driver available to take on that route, and obviously it's still predicting time. But when you've only got, as Taj was saying, that 2% left over in the pot to put another bus on the road, previously, bus breaks down, send out another bus, we can get going. Because the operators are so uncertain, there isn't that spare capacity to do it, and hence we're seeing this problem more. So yes, the ghost bus problem needs solving in terms of the technical solution, but it is manifesting more because of that issue with this shrinking down of bus operators able to cope with the day-to-day, the normal of everything that happens on a transport network where everything isn't perfect. And I think that's a key based on that previous report about the funding, really, and it being certain, and them knowing that they can invest in a really good network, not just try and make it through the week.
Thank you very much. And I think the network plans that we all talked about are also dependent on what the government do next in terms of their funding. It's all got a bit of a knock-on effect, hasn't it? But we'll come back to that. I've got Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of questions from me. There are more things that are detailed under the previous item, and it seems more relevant to bring them up in this discussion about the long listing and the short listing of the bus routes that we're looking to create or to subsidise. And we're given the criteria about how that shortlisting process would work, but I noticed the absence from it is the potential impact those new services might have on air quality and emissions reduction. Then it's not considered as part of the criteria for measuring which are the more valuable services alongside all of the other things. And I think we're missing a trick there, because building on a point I made yesterday about in the active travel meeting about new housing developments, potentially if we could get in early while habits are forming, we could really have a significant impact on carbon reduction and air quality. So I would hope that we could add that to the list of considerations. But also under the general BSIP, is there money set aside within this for basically a good marketing and advertising campaign for the new services we're creating? Because assuming we can create a reliable bus service that is gold plated, I'm with the Councillor Salam, we should aim for the stars and we might hit the moon. At the moment I can see maybe some of that spare capacity is lined up outside Huddersfield train station covering TransPennine Express's backside. But yeah, I think an effective advertising campaign to let people know what we've done and how successful we've been, and also to try and encourage them out of their cars, might be a boon to our passenger numbers.
Okay, we'll come back to that. And yes, there is we are doing marketing alongside in BSIP, and that's listed there. So we'll come back to that. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Three things. I'll try and be quite brief. I've had a question from a resident, long-term bus users, about cancellations database, that there's no transparency on cancellations. Within WICA, is there a big picture being looked at as to what's being cancelled frequently? How much information do we get? And how transparent is that to the public? Still, the lack of response to complaints that the bus companies aren't keeping to their own charters, and if the enhanced partnership, and as part of the enhanced partnership, can we put more pressure on them to do so? People are not getting responses to complaints from First, if they even know how to complain. And thirdly, questions about a lack of seating with the redo of the Leeds bus station, unfortunately, that people are a bit confused about where to queue and that there aren't enough places to sit. Thank you.
Okay, and then I've got Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The report on page 1331 talks about integration, which ironically used to be the title of this committee. One time we used to be the Integrated Transport Committee. Couple of things there. The Leeds coach station, people start and finish their the holidays there. So often they're coming with cases. There's nowhere really where you can drop somebody off by car, drop and go or anything like that. So as somebody who didn't know that end of Leeds, you're driving around looking for somewhere where a passenger can get out and scuttle across. So we need to look at integration of all modes, because 2.22 talks about integrating different public transport, but we should be looking at integrating all modes of transport. And we're talking about new modes of transport, such as e-scooters. I noticed yesterday when we were coming into the meeting that the buses have a sign up now saying no e-scooters can be brought onto the bus. So the start and finish of journeys, short journeys that could be done on e-scooter, makes it difficult if you can't take an e-scooter. I wouldn't think that they were that onerous that you can't take an e-scooter on one of the buses. And similar integration, we could look at integrating active travel and having active travel hubs along routes, so that at certain places there are lockers where you can cycle to, get off your bike and get on a bus service to complete your journey, which would hopefully encourage people to reduce cars and use public transport. Obviously at rail stations and that there are some parking, but there doesn't seem to be the same integration along bus routes. Councillor Wilson mentioned bus stops and bus shelters is something which has come up with me, that when Arriva have moved bus routes, there's no provision. You put a bus stop up, the bus stop doesn't have real-time information, and the only way apparently that Wyker will put a bus shelter in, and I don't know if we relocate from bus when they've moved routes, is if there's a developer contribution, or is it more than 50 passengers a day, Dave? So where, using Murfield example, where the Murfield 25 massive development has had any developer contribution, that may have already been allocated to existing routes, which means that on the new routes, the passengers are left exposed to the elements. If the bus services are not reliable and the experience is not comfortable for somebody waiting, are we going to achieve that 50 people a day when they're stood out in the wind and rain? And the real-time information he's looking at, because when I was leaving the meeting yesterday, the real-time information for PR1 to go to the park and ride was showing the next bus was going to be 27 minutes. Well, they're about every 10 or 15 or something, aren't they? So the real-time information needs to be, actually says real-time. But yeah, we need to be upping the game on integration, passenger comfort, and information to passengers.
All sounds sensible. Councillor Scullion, and then I'll go to Councillor Carroll and then Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I do hate to agree with Councillor Bolt too much. It absolutely ruins my reputation. But I also wanted to touch on passenger experience. Interesting to hear what you had to say about that interconnectivity in terms of bus stations. Some of the new Halifax bus station will have exactly those things that you're discussing, and let's hope that that is a rollout that we will see. I just wanted to say that in terms of passenger experience across West Yorkshire, it's different in the different boroughs, of course. And I just wanted to touch on the question of digital in terms of real-time information and digital information. Some parts of our lovely borough of Calderdale do not have mobile phone coverage, particularly on the tops, and we need a proper rollout of that coverage, but also need to think about, I hate to say it, proper timetables, printed timetables in those areas where there isn't electronic access. People say, oh, you can go on your phone. Well, actually, no, you can't if you're up the back end of Cragvale. And we really envy Leeds. I come out of this building and I look at what Leeds have got and think, ooh, yes, we could do some of that. The other, really, to agree with Councillor Bolt, is about shelter. And that's fine if you're in a city, but actually, if you're in bits of Calderdale and it's sleeting sideways, the question of bus shelters is really, really important to us. So, general rollout of digital in a different way, and just agreeing with Councillor Bolt about lobbying for bus shelters. My reputation is wrecked, Chair.
Keep going, Jane.
Councillor Carroll and then Councillor Hutchinson, I'll go back to
I was going to reassume balance by disagreeing with Councillor Bolt on a couple of things. The one first thing I'll disagree, we are doing a lot of work to try and reduce the amount of cars coming into the city. Regardless of whether you have cases, there's a very easy way to get to Leeds bus station, and that is the fact that it is Leeds bus station. Any bus from anywhere in the city will take you to that bus station. So I think, any bus from Murfield will also, you'll be able to get a bus, I'm sure, into Leeds City bus station. It's probably the best connected place in West Yorkshire, I would have said, looking at it. You raised the point about e-scooters. I was going to make the quick point. We've discussed it many times in the active travel meetings that I have at Leeds City Council. They are currently illegal on all streets outside trials, and that is the guidance we'll wait for and see what happens. There are real concerns around e-scooters, on whether they should be on the pavement, on cycle, segregated cycle infrastructure. At the moment, obviously, they are classed as a motorised vehicle, so they're supposed to be on the road. They're probably not safe for somebody to use on the road for those using it, and whether or not they're safe for the people on the footpath if they're using them on the footpath, that's another argument. So we have to wait for that. But the one thing I was going to say, which is a real positive, is you'll be very happy to see the integration of the new Leeds public e-bike scheme that will be coming very shortly. So when you get off your bus, you'll be able to get one of the docked schemes from the city centre or various of the areas. The one thing, obviously, to put that in a West Yorkshire context, Leeds is the biggest hub, and that then it is the easiest place to bring it first. But then we'll look at those connectivity elsewhere, and other hubs I know is something that the Mayor's keen on, so that you can have your e-bike, cycle to your local station, get off at this end, and then pick up another bike and get where you're going. So I think that's going to be a real positive for that problem with sometimes you can't get your bike on the bus. Well, maybe leave it at the train station, and then maybe you'll be able to borrow one when you get here as well, and that'll be a great one.
Councillor Hutchinson.
It was just the same point about the illegality of e-scooters on the public highway currently.
Should they have been mentioned in the report then that new modes of transport such as e-scooters will improve the equality?
Anyway, so a few things to address there then, Dave rather. So I've got ghost buses, we're going to have a workshop on that, aren't we? Air quality, cancellation database, marketing of new services. Can you answer those in particular?
Yes, I can. I mean, I think that the ghost bus issue, I will bring some more detail back to you, and perhaps as Councillor Swift suggested, some explainers as well, because it is a very complex thing. Although I think, as Councillor Carlill has said, actually there's a positive in this, because it's sort of exposing the weaknesses in the system a little bit, and to a certain extent that perhaps hasn't been the case in years gone by, when buses just didn't turn up. So to a certain extent, it's a useful tool ultimately, and if we get it right, it'd be good. I think in terms of the data, we had two meetings ago, and the bus operators and train operators came into it. We had a long session to talk about punctuality, reliability. I think it's probably value in doing that again. And I think one of the things that came out of that meeting was that we need to start bringing to you more information in terms of things like bus cancellations and punctuality, reliability. I think from memory, we've normally given you quarterly figures on that front, and I think we're about due to do that for the next meeting. I think something a little bit more sophisticated was asked for at that meeting. I think we're sort of looking at how to do that. I think we do walk a fine balance with this, and it sort of gets to the marketing and the promotions point as well, because in one sense we actually want visibility and accountability of bus service performance, but now that we necessarily want to put off people from using the bus, because we want to grow bus patronage, and notwithstanding some of the challenges that people face, there's still an awful lot of buses out there and an awful lot of people travelling on them, and still quite a lot of them run on sort of within 5 minutes at least of being on time. So finding that balance. But I think the other point I think that's been made a few times is about sort of marketing, behaviour change campaigns, business to business sales, things like that, to actually encourage and promote bus use in ways in which traditionally the bus industry and probably transport authorities haven't done. And I think that there is a really strong point around how you link it with new housing, because I think there are lots of examples of new housing in West Yorkshire that are not well connected by bus, and that's probably something in longer term we've got to address, because and it's often difficult because where the new housing is in greenfields and are not necessarily on bus routes, and so there's but once people move into them, and we're modernising what we call the residential M-card scheme. When people move into them, then we need to put bus tickets in their hands, essentially, maybe electronically. And I think just finally on Councillor Scullion's point, understood about mobile phone coverage. There are more real-time displays in Leeds because the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme, government funding, enabled that. The Transforming Cities Fund has plans to extend that in other parts.
Thank you very much. So there's still work to do on VSIP, and regarding the marketing, I do want the councillors still to be involved in that and make sure the campaigns are going to hit local communities and really be appropriate. So we're going to do more of that, aren't we? And we're going to do more on ghost buses.
Yes, and I think it's fair to sort of remind the committee that the bus service improvement plan is delegated to this committee to actually manage. So we will bring more and more reports as to what we're doing back to this committee.
Thank you. So the report, as a recommendation, was to note the early findings and the progress being made on bus service improvement plan. I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. So moving on then to the next paper, which actually goes to some of the points Councillor Swift was raising about the planning and the future networks, etc. West Yorkshire Local Transport Plan update. Dave Haskins.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll give you a brief overview of the paper in terms of some key points around the local transport plan development. And we're looking here to agree the strategic approach and key messages for development of the Mayor's local transport plan, and give you some update on where we're up to in terms of the consultation relating to it, which does come back to some issues around government guidance and the issue of government guidance. So firstly, this is our current local transport plan. It's called West Yorkshire Transport Strategy 2040. It's been in place for about 6 years or 5 years. There's a duty to update that every 5 years, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And obviously it's key in terms of meeting the objectives, or setting out how we're going to meet the objectives that we're trying to achieve. In particular, this increased emphasis now on how we decarbonise the transport sector. So that's also key in terms of guidance, which I'll come on to in a minute. Quite critically, which is another point, and increasingly I think, local transport plans are used for how we bid for, prioritise and allocate funds. And this Mayor's local transport plan will form the basis for future delivery programmes, including city region sustainable transport settlement. In the past, there's never been a clear and explicit link between what we say in our local transport plans and what we get in terms of our funding. This has been made very clear that in this case it is. And there's also links to our decarbonisation, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and I'll say a bit more about that. So I know you've had a previous update in October 22 about where we're up to, with the expectation that guidance was going to be coming out shortly, so we can get our transport plans adopted by early 2024. This guidance hasn't yet come out, and we've been in discussions with the Department for Transport, and it's still not clear even within the department when this is due to emerge. That, of course, has some ramifications for our work plan. We can move on with the work, but we not in the full knowledge of what it is we actually need to comply with. Also, alongside the guidance in the local transport plan, there's guidance around quantifying, we call it QCR, quantified carbon reductions. And again, the extent to which we are able to demonstrate that we can quantify what our carbon reductions are on this path to net zero 2038 also is going to be a factor in what it unlocks in terms of funding. So we're doing some technical work around that at the moment, and what we need to be looking at is what kind of measures, or what we're looking at in one way is, if you introduce certain sets of measures and certain sets of policies, what that will lead to in terms of changes in travel patterns and behaviour, and what that will lead to in terms of decarbonisation. This is a piece of work that's ongoing, and as the findings of that work come out, it will inform us as to what level of we call them interventions, whether they're demand management type of interventions like the clean air zone in Bradford, for example, what type of interventions might be needed in the future to actually achieve that target. That's not to say that we are bound to do those interventions, it's just giving us a flavour of what would be required. Moving back to the timescales though, where we are at the moment with the delay of the publication of guidance makes early 2024 a significant challenge. And timescales are already looking like they're being pushed out because we do need to consult on the local transport plan, and we need to make sure that consultation is lawful and is fair and has been undertaken in respect of the guidance that's not yet come out. So that is holding us back a little bit. The work is ploughing on, but the overall timescales are looking challenging. Having said that, I would expect DfT to be reasonable in their expectations about when LTPs are adopted in light of the work that needs to be done along the way. We have done quite a lot of work already since the previous adoption around issues like the Connectivity Infrastructure Plan, the Mass Transit Vision and the Shared Transport Strategy. And also obviously we've been making the case for investment through the significant funding settlements we've received on things like TCF and CRSDS, where we're the third largest in the country for getting that. And we're also doing supplementary activity around areas like active travel and rail, electric vehicles and freight as well. So there's a lot of work to be done. I've mentioned the work around demand management and how that's going to be moving forward, and I will come back to that in the future committee and update members on where the progress is going there. Moving on to in 216 of the report, we talk about the emerging overarching narrative. And this is a narrative that we set out at the moment, which includes the key areas that we're going to, this is evolving work, sorry, the key areas that we see as part of the overarching transport strategy. Mass transit is a key area within this, and we see that as being key to unlocking productivity of our polycentric region. We've talked already about buses in terms of the previous item, but there needs to be a clear focus on making space for buses and active travel on our roads. And of course, around the delivery of a net zero carbon, sorry, buses need to be run efficiently as well, I should have said, net zero carbon. And finally, around equality being at the forefront of the LTP, where everyone can access the opportunities that we expect people to be able to access. So what we are looking at is looking at focus on a number of areas, and I won't go into the detail of them, they are set out in the report. And these include delivering the bus reform or through franchising, for instance, unlocking the benefits of mass transit, customer-focused rail, making active travel the natural choice for shorter journeys, and also shared transport solutions which empower local communities. There is a need for this to move at pace, and the challenge move at pace in implementing the local transport plan once it's adopted. And as I've said already, we have talked about how we can align things like the policy options around decarbonisation and making it fit with other aspects. I want to mention just a little bit on, I won't go into the detail in 221 about each of those areas I've just mentioned, but to mention in terms of unlocking the benefits of mass transit, we are doing some work at the moment which is going to involve, I think through March and April, quite a significant data collection exercise across West Yorkshire. The briefing notes will be sent out around this to portfolio leads in the next few weeks or so to alert and inform as to what those surveys will involve. But what's key for us is that data collection exercise, which is a big one in the context of what we do in terms of transport planning, will also help inform where we have data gaps on the transport side for wider policy areas, which are not just around mass transit. So there is a read across there, which is really, really key for us. I think that's probably about as far as I'll go on the report for now, Councillor Hinchcliffe, but happy to take questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. I mean, obviously in the previous item mentioned integration. I'd like to think that any transport plan we do across West Yorkshire does obviously focus on that as a priority, integration between different modes. I'd also just question having to wait for Department of Transport, local transport guidance. Can we just get on with it? Because I'm not anticipating that anytime soon. I can't imagine that they'd be saying anything that revolutionary. So surely we just get on with it, and when it comes out, then we modify it and keep it as a flexible document, because we really do need this local transport plan, and I don't really want to be driven by government, Dave.
I'll just come back. Absolutely, I think we are getting on with it. I'll be absolutely clear about that. I think it says in the report that we will refine it as and when the guidance comes through. I think the challenge within that relates to the bit around the consultation, the extent to which we can, and we are taking views on this, the extent which we can go out to consultation in light of the fact we don't have the clear guidance. That those are the kind of things that can trip us up going forward.
So can I just see those people indicate? I saw Councillor Carlill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, I was just going to come back on that and say we are getting a bit of a recurring theme in these papers. It carries on into the next one as well, but in terms of the bus funding, we're seeing a government delay in that, which is leading to the issues we've talked about. In terms of the local transport guidance, local transport plan guidance, we're seeing a government delay in that. We're about to talk about the active travel fund, where we've seen a government delay in that, and Dave did make the point, I had a little giggle of whether or not we'll get flexibility in whether we have to deliver the local transport plan by the agreed deadline if they're late on the guidance, as we'll find on the next paper. That's not always the case. It normally is we have to deliver it quick. But although these are government guidance points, and you could say, well, that's just in terms of putting the guidance together to help officers such as yourselves do the job, but really it's not just delaying that, it's delaying keeping our existing bus networks, enhancing the new ones to create an improved network, the decarbonisation of public transport, therefore the tackling of the climate emergency, and then in our work to improve walking, cycling, bus and move to a more sustainable network. On the active travel side, I mean, we were given a tier 3 organisation in terms of active travel to show that we are ambitious politically to make the changes needed, but also trusted to deliver at pace. unfortunately, that all seems to be held in the balance, because although we're trusted to deliver at pace, getting the go-ahead seems to be the thing that's delayed it. And that does seem to be the recurring thing. I mean, Dave quite rightly pointed out, all of this needs to move at pace. And I think we're all ready to. And I've not heard any district say they're not ready to do that across West Yorkshire. And certainly the mayor would like to move at pace. But every issue seems to come to the same one. And I'm just wondering what we have had from the Department for Transport that's ever been delivered on time and with certainty. Are we still in that hang-up from the fact that we didn't know who was going to be Prime Minister from one week to the next, and they're still working that out? Where are we, and where are the decisions coming from? I guess that's not a question that our officers can answer, but I'll leave that one out there. Maybe we'll get a response at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I mean, I think there's going to be like 15 housing ministers in the last 10 years, isn't there? And when you have that kind of revolving door, it's very difficult for any government to set policy. So we just need them to settle down and make some decisions. Councillor Hutchinson next.
Thank you, Chair. For those of us charged with public engagement, in Calderdale we were planning to have public engagement on the draft local plan in May. Is that still seen as a reasonable thing to do, even if the actual format of consultation is not sort of decided? At least it would get people thinking about these issues. So, is that something that would seem reasonable to go ahead with?
Just quickly, Dave, May.
I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but I would have thought it would be reasonable to pursue that. There are areas where we have other interfaces on consultation where we have to take advice as to how various consultations interact with each other, and in the knowledge you do consultation in the knowledge of something else happening. But I think in this instance I'd be fine with that.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the emerging overarching narrative, is there an opportunity for individual districts or boroughs to feed back or comment on the development during the process?
I think the simple question is absolutely. We are engaging at the officer level throughout this whole process, and we'll be doing an ongoing series of briefings with members as to requirement of to where we're up to. So yeah, we would welcome feedback on the narrative, certainly.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as so many have said, it's hard to dream of better transport when the government just won't commit to the absolute fundamentals. But just a quick question on how this inertia is hindering progress towards bus reform and where we're at with that. I appreciate it's a long process of many hurdles, but it would be helpful to know whether now or otherwise where we're at in that process and if this inertia is hindering that further. Thank you.
As things stand, I'll be cautious when I say as things stand, it's not hindering progress we're making on bus reform. We're still on track with the timescales we set on bus reform. I think a report will be brought to Combined Authority in March with an update on that, but we are on track there.
I guess we're not waiting for government guidance on that, or we can do it. When we get on to do things ourselves, we can go quite quickly, can't we? Councillor Swift.
Yeah, part of my comments Mel's already covered, so thank you for that assurance. Just one specific, in 221 E, something seems to have popped up that I've never seen before, reference to a new line between Leeds and Sheffield. Sorry, 2.21 E, customer focused rail. My understanding, Chair, was that we were still stuck at the point where we were wanting the government go ahead to fund how you got the HS2 trains into Leeds. Now, I didn't think there was anything as clear cut or as specific as a new line between Leeds and Sheffield.
It's the HS2 thing. So they're waiting, not last October, but the October before that, the government said they were going to provide some terms of reference for a study for how trains got from Sheffield to Leeds and how they got from Leeds to Bradford. But we're still waiting for those terms of reference so that that work can be started. Again, I'm afraid that just going back to Councillor Carlo's point, that it just continues the theme of this meeting, I'm afraid. Dave, do you want to speak in a more technical way about that?
I'm not sure I could add a lot more to that. I think the wording probably could have been a bit slightly better there, but I think it's one of the considerations of what we'd expect to come out of that was, is there a need for a new line as part of those proposals?
Lovely. So I'm not seeing anybody else indicating on this item. So just going to the recommendations then, obviously approving the development of a new Mayor's West Yorkshire Local Transport Plan, which we all want to see as quickly as possible, and the development of the transport line in line with obviously the Climate and Environment Plan target that we've got of 2038. So I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. So moving on to the next item, which is Emma Longbottom. I saw her appear there. Nice to see you, Emma. West Yorkshire Plan. Obviously, transport is a big part of this, but also it's wider than that as well. Emma, do you want to just go into that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just spend a couple of minutes, if I can, going through sort of some of the background of where we've got to, and then I'd really welcome comments on the plan as it's drafted at the moment. So we have been drafting the West Yorkshire Plan for a little while now, and we've had been working really closely with colleagues in local authorities and with wider partners as well to get this drafted. The purpose of it really is to set the long-term trajectory to 2040. So what do we want for West Yorkshire? Who do we want to be, and what do we want to be known as? Really the main principle behind this was us being clear with government and wider partners and stakeholders, both regionally and nationally, about what West Yorkshire is, who we are, what we do, and what our priorities are. So although we wouldn't ever stop members of the public from reading this, they're not the primary audience. This is very much about us talking to government and partners. One of the principles behind it was making sure that we speak with one voice, so that we have that shared endeavour, and so that when people come either up to West Yorkshire or when colleagues are talking at national events, etc., we're all saying the same things. We're all being very clear about what those priorities are, because that is a criticism that we've had previously, that hasn't always happened in the past. So that's sort of the principle. So we've been developing this, as I said, for a few months now. The first draft is attached to Appendix 1, which really sets out the vision and the narrative and that really story about West Yorkshire, which is not something that we've ever really had before. So it's quite a new piece of work. And we're really trying to take people on a bit of a hearts and minds journey with this, really. Getting people to really sort of have a bit of a feel about who West Yorkshire are and what we do. This will sit at the top of all our policies and strategies. So the local transport plan, which we were just talking about, will sit within this as a framework of policies and strategies. And the part that we have to do next is explaining how those policies and strategies all interrelate. So clearly the local transport plan and our climate plans, etc., have a real crossover. So explaining how these things all fit together and fit towards those priorities for West Yorkshire. So the ultimate ambition really is that we have draft ambitions, a draft vision, and that we're very clear about who we are and what we do. And that going forward, people use this, so it's used to inform all the work that we do. So it will be used, and we've been working really closely with colleagues who are developing the local transport plan to make sure that we have that alignment there. And if I may, something that's not in the paper, but just a couple of next steps of what's happening next. So we've been going around all the committees, and we've been also talking to external partners, and a range of different organisations. And apologies if you've already heard this and read this a few times if you've been to other committees. So what we'll be doing next is we will be refining it. So taking on board comments that people have given us, and refining that down into a final draft, which will then circulate back round for any final comments. And then we were aiming for sign-off of the text at the March Combined Authority meeting, and then it will be developed into a web page on the Combined Authority's website, which we can then start to use and share with partners. And we will also be working on a toolkit that sits underneath that about how we suggest people use this, some slides that people can use and presentations, etc., so that when they're out and about talking to people, you've got a really easy way to talk about West Yorkshire and our plans and our vision for the future. And it would be really helpful if people would be happy to do it. The recommendations at 10.1 are that people provide some comments on the content of what's in Appendix 1, the language that we've used, and anything that you think might be missing or that needs to be removed that you don't like, that would be really helpful for us to then refine that further. And that's, I think, all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So there's a draft in the papers. I think we've already fed back, haven't we? I mean, I know we have as a district around UK City of Culture, etc. I remember some comments going back, so I think we've already had our say to a certain extent. Is anybody anything to add on that? No? I mean, obviously we talked earlier about the importance of transport in terms of economic prosperity, and we would like to see that obviously as a major plank of this, given what this committee's subject is, of course, as you would imagine. Anything on that about our ambitions, but also about the day-to-day running of services so that people can rely on, I think would be really beneficial. And does this come back to us at some other point, Emma?
I don't think we'll have time to come back to the formal committee, but what we will do is when we've made the refinements, we will circulate to all members who have been part of committees by email ahead of it going to the Combined Authority in March.
Okay, so the leaders get to see this before March. So then obviously we can circulate as and when. Lovely. Thank you very much. So recommendations are just saying we consider the draft vision narrative. So comments have been made before on this and will be going forward. I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you very much, Emma, for that. So now moving on to item 9, transport policy update. I think this is where we have the bus stop stuff in here, is it?
That's right.
Lovely. Rachel.
Yes, thank you. Apologies, I hadn't turned the microphone on. So purpose of this report is to give members of Transport Committee an update on relevant matters and developments that haven't been covered elsewhere in the agenda. So just to pick out a few key points and paragraphs from the text that you've got in the report. Transport for the North, the board last met in December. It's due to meet again on the 23rd of March. In particular, I wanted to draw out the strategic transport plan, which was presented to the board meeting back in December. It is actually strategic transport plan 2. There is one in existence at the moment. It's currently being developed in draft format. Comments and feedback were invited, and the Combined Authority put in a response by the deadline, which was middle of January. And I understand from Transport for the North colleagues that a revised draft of that document should be released in the next week or so, and then it's expected that it will be brought back to the next board for discussion. Other things I wanted to pull out in terms of Transport for the North matters, there's obviously been a reorganisation underway in the context of the new business plan, and that has led to a number of new appointments being made in recent months. They have now been completed with new people coming in to take up those posts imminently or already in place. In terms of rail updates, obviously a very live situation as we've touched on already in the meeting around the Transpennine route upgrade, which obviously will look to deliver tangible benefits and improvements in West Yorkshire, although obviously whilst the works is underway, that will lead to change in travel patterns for users of the affected areas and routes, with replacement buses and diversionary routes in place for the duration. There was a briefing that took place of members on the 3rd of February, and then the first blockade is in works are underway at Morley Station, so there's no direct service between Huddersfield and Leeds at the moment between the 4th and the 12th of February. This is going to be followed by some significant works over at Staley Bridge over the rest of this month and then into March as well. And then, as it says in the report, at 2.13 further works planned in the area in Batley and between Huddersfield and Mirfield over the sort of summer and into the autumn period. Briefly, 2.15 West Yorkshire Rail Strategy. We do have a draft strategy which I believe has been shared with members and district partners. We are looking to go out to consultation with the public on that. We're looking to tie that in with the report, the local transport plan development and the consultation that Dave referred to in the couple of reports ago. So just moving on to the Levelling Up Fund and picking up the discussions that we sort of had earlier in the meeting, particularly around bus shelters. So last month there was an announcement from government that the Combined Authority's bid had been provisionally successful, subject to further business case work, which is now underway. And the proposed total package as it sets out in 2.18 is 47.25 million, with a little over 41 million coming from Levelling Up Fund. The expectation is that all schemes will be completed during financial year 25-26. So the successful package includes 2 corridor schemes, one in Calderdale, the A629, and one in Wakefield, the A639, and then a package of bus journey improvements supporting that, which is West Yorkshire wide, which includes upgrades to a number of bus stations, you know, a significant number of bus stops, where we're looking at new and replacement bus shelters and new real-time information, as well as other safety, accessibility and environmental improvements as well. On top of that, there's also a bus hotspot package going to be delivered as part of Levelling Up Fund. You know, and obviously we've been working very closely with both the bus operators and also in collaboration with district partner officers as well. And they've obviously looking at where there's pinch points and constriction on the highway network, as highlighted by bus operators as well. Now that bus hotspot package under Levelling Up Fund will be focused on Bradford, Leeds and Wakefield. But what I would say is the report says in 2.25, you know, Levelling Up Fund is being delivered alongside some other funding programmes like CRSTS and Transforming Cities Fund as well. You know, they've both got schemes looking at improvements for bus journeys and bus priority measures. And, you know, particularly on like the bus hotspots for Calderdale and Kirklees, sorry, there are specific allocations made under CRSTS to pick up that as well. So I think, you know, an inception meeting has now taken place with DFT earlier this week. And so, you know, as I say, work is underway in earnest. So the recommendation at 10.1, Chair, is that the committee notes the updates that have been provided in this report this morning.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel. Just on the independent economic review, I wouldn't mind seeing where we're at with that. It's a while since I looked at that, and I just want to make sure that's obviously quite a significant, and I want to make sure that it reflects West Yorkshire's priorities.
Yeah, I'll pick that up. Thank you, Chair. Yes.
And can we also Councillor Wilson spoke earlier in the meeting about the modifications he'd like to see at bus stops, etc. Is that something that can be included in the scope of this money?
I believe so. It's certainly looking at, you know, the types of measures that are needed at, well, I think it's over 500 bus stops altogether across West Yorkshire. So I think, you know, depending on the bus stop, there's a package of measures that can be delivered as part of Levelling Up Fund, and also, you know, through things like BSIP as well.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that. That's good to hear. And I think you said it's the funding subject to a business case. So I guess how that money exactly is going to be used hasn't quite been determined yet. So how can we and other councillors engage with that process? And also, do we know what criteria will need to be used? So is part of the funding that, you know, there needs to be criteria around, for example, where a new pedestrian crossing could be put in, or is that up to us to decide, you know, how that money is used, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you for that. We discussed the matter of the business case at the inception meeting earlier this week, Councillor Wilson, and I think we're still awaiting confirmation from DFT about exactly what that needs to entail, enable us to come forward with the business case to secure that the money's going forward. But, you know, my hope would be that, you know, detail around what you're, you know, highlighting there would be for us to decide within this area, you know, within West Yorkshire itself. So yeah, awaiting further details at the moment.
Obviously, for improvements like that, we do need to work at ward level to make sure that councillors are involved. Otherwise, so there's quite a lot of engagement planning to be done there, I'd suggest. I've got Councillor Firth and Councillor Thompson.
Just a couple of points, one for information. I have arranged for Network Rail to do a presentation to all councillors in Kirklees on March the 1st. And it's not for the public, it's for all councillors. I'm sure they'll ask some very searching questions. I did intend to come to a full council meeting, but just couldn't fit it in. Half an hour won't be enough, I'm sure. So it's tabled for a couple of hours. But the other comment, if you like, on the Levelling Up Fund and the derisory amount that Kirklees have been awarded, I read the report with some disbelief. I think we get a little bit for Batley Bus Station, and that's your lot. So I'm really disappointed in how this money is being spread. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, we want to start on levelling up.
We're not levelling up Kirklees, are we?
Obviously, nationally, it's been pretty obviously bad news for the whole region, hasn't it? I mean, I know obviously Batley was successful, but Leeds and Bradford were not successful at all this time with their 10 bids, and I know Wakefield, Calderdale, etc. as well. I just want to go to Councillor Thompson, then I'll go back to Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So pleased to include pleased to see parts of our ward included, but it would be really good to have thorough discussion with ward members where schemes do affect us, because so far that hasn't been the case in my experience. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of work with officers, but, you know, yeah, there needs to be engagement with the ward members. You're absolutely right. As part of sort of firming up those plans, you know, and exact locations around things like the bus hotspot programme. Just to sort of comment as well, Chair, if I may, you know, there were, you know, obviously hundreds of bids, as I understand it, went into the Levelling Up Fund nationally. For, you know, a relatively modest pot of money at the end of the day. So, you know, unfortunately, it has led to a lot of the bids not being successful this time round.
And obviously, just from our point of view as a West Yorkshire committee, we want to make sure that all districts are progressing at the same speed when it comes to investment around this issue. So obviously CRSTS has been invested alongside this Levelling Up, and just like to make sure that impacts are felt all across the region with those two investments. Anything else before we go to recommendation? I can't see anything else indicating. So committee notes the update Brandon's report. Obviously I have to recommend that. All those in favour please show. We note it publicly. Thank you very much. Now moving on to the last item on the agenda, which is Active Travel Fund 4. Now we did have quite a long discussion about this yesterday in a workshop of Transport Committee members, which I find personally very useful. Is this you again, Rachel?
It is, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. So the purpose of this report is to provide members of the Transport Committee with an overview of the Active Travel Fund 4 process and the proposed approach that we're wanting to take to the submission of a West Yorkshire bid for the funding, and then in 1.2 to seek approval for delegated authority for approval of the final bid document to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Transport Committee. So, in summary, on the 10th of January, the West Yorkshire was invited to submit a bid for Active Travel Fund 4, which is predominantly a capital opportunity to support the uptake of active travel for trips and everyday trips. Now, despite there being a delay on further guidance and provision being made, the deadline for submission of bids has remained at the 24th of February, so we're working collectively in collaboration to a very tight timescale on the submission of this bid. So a long list has been produced, and bids are going to be assessed by Active Travel England based on the following sort of criteria, which I won't go through but in detail, but, you know, compliance with the ATF4 funding principles, which are set out in the report in 2.2, predominantly around engagement with local communities and design of the scheme. Also, matters such as quality, value for money as you'd expect, and deliverability, of course, are going to be key considerations when determining successful outcomes. So as it says in 2.3, West Yorkshire has been given an indicative allocation it's actually between 12 and 13 million pounds to assist in the creation of our bid that we put forward. But as Councillor Carlill said earlier as well, with us being a Tier 3 authority, we've been actively encouraged to submit up to 300% of the value allocation that we've been given, because if we've got strong schemes, strong bids that we can bring forward, and with the track record, hopefully that will put us well placed to get hopefully a very positive outcome from this bid. Schemes have got to be in construction committed by March 24, so you know that's a very quick process. The schemes need to be at an enhanced stage of deliverability, I'd suggest, all ready to go forward. There is the opportunity for up to 5% of the capital value to come forward as revenue to support associated behaviour change as well to these interventions that we would be looking to fund through the capital award. There is also an opportunity set out in 2.6 to secure funding for development of maybe some longer term larger schemes as well as the actual physical delivery of infrastructure through this programme too. So as I said, what we've done, we've been obviously working collectively very closely between the Combined Authority, district partners and some other interested parties as well to develop a long list of potential schemes. As part of that, there's obviously quite a number of schemes that have been identified within districts, but then also it's proposed that there's a number of West Yorkshire wide schemes to be potentially funded through the bid that we put forward as well, which is set out in 2.8. How this long list gets prioritised down will depend on how well we can meet the objectives as set out earlier in the report, as I alluded to a couple of minutes ago, plus obviously the potential for the individual scheme to meet the objectives of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, sort of areas such as modal shift, improvements in air quality, and obviously access to things like jobs and training and education. So moving to 10.1, Chair, to the recommendations. The recommendation that the Transport Committee gives approval to the Combined Authority submitting a bid for Active Travel Fund 4, and as set out in the approach outlined briefly in this report. And then 10.2, that the Transport Committee delegates final approval of the bid to submit to ATF4 on behalf of the Combined Authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also this is a theme, but this has come through very quickly now because it's been delayed for a long time from government, and therefore, but now business being like next week or the week after. So that's why this is having to go very quickly. Otherwise, we won't have to be making these recommendations, would we? And Councillor Carroll, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the bid is, because as it was noted, we've been asked to apply for 300% of our bid. If we get 150% of it, and government are saying we have more money than we're to be expected, then I'll be taking that probably as a cut, because I'm expecting hopefully the whole 300%, as we've got obviously proven track record in this area. So I would really like to see that, and I know that all districts have schemes that far outweigh the maximum amount of the bid. So choosing these is going to be really difficult.
And because, of course, they've got to be shovel ready, haven't they? Because they've got to go straight away now. It's schemes we already know about. Councillor Salam?
Yeah, Chair, just on 2.8, I think it's bullet point 2, is it? The cycle parking fund. I mean, that's something that we've been talking about for some time. But one of the things that I missed yesterday, and I thought about afterward, is that we had an initiative where cycle to work schemes, where the employers were actually engaged in that, and you took a loan out and then you paid it back through salary sacrifice, but there was there was a bit of a write-off at the end of it. That has actually just gone off the grid all of a sudden, because if we're going to put these cycling parking hangers in the streets, it just gives a wrong impression, because I would demand one for my street then, and then somebody else will demand. I think it's where there is a need, whether it's in city centres or even like big commercial employers like Sainsbury's and Morrison's and Tesco's, where people could actually go cycling to for shopping, and they don't want to just leave their bike outside sometimes because they may have something on it that from a previous shopping trip. So if these hangers are going to go, we could actually work with employers like that also, or providers of whatever they're providing, to make sure that we're encouraging all modes of and all lanes of cycling, rather than just saying cycle to work, but at the end of it you'll get a little cage and it's in snow and rain and everything, and so therefore if we're doing that, I think that might be more beneficial.
Can that be considered as part of it?
And hopefully, yes. I mean, I'm not close to the individual schemes that are being considered at the moment, but as Councillor Carlisle says, there is an awful long list, from each district. So hopefully, there's a range of different solutions being looked at as part of that, Councillor Salam. So yeah, but I'll make sure I feed that back in to officers.
Lovely, thank you. So I can't see anybody else indicating. So just to go. Oh, sorry, Councillor Fur.
No, thank you, Chair. We, as you know, and most colleagues know, we had a very good discussion yesterday. But on the long list, when the long list, a very long list, gets to a shorter list, I think members, or at least the portfolio holders, should have oversight of this. I want some equity in this, in the bids put forward. I don't want any big bids going through to the detriment of some smaller authorities, if you like. So I think portfolio holders should have a look at these schemes, at the short list. I don't want a long list, because they probably go from here to the station. And have an oversight of what's going forward. And I hope you will support this, Chair.
So I think that the plan is that portfolio holders and their officers in districts come up with their list now, isn't it, and then feed it through to West Yorkshire Combined Authority. I think that's how it's meant to work.
Yes, the list has gone in, but I would like oversight before the list is submitted.
Right. Well, obviously we'll consult all the way along, as I'm sure we will, but it's 24th of February, it's not very far away, so I think the recommendation is that it's delegated to myself and the Vice Chair. If you don't want that recommendation, then we'd have to put a different recommendation in. Well, I think portfolio holders have to, we can't have portfolio holders all submitting and vetoing a thing, can we? I suppose that's the problem at the end of the day. There needs to be an arbiter, I suppose the arbiter is myself and Councillor Carlisle.
Sorry, we don't have an argument. The arbiter will be yourself, but I would like some portfolio holders to have an input.
Yeah, certainly before it's submitted, of course, portfolio holders should know what that is. Absolutely.
Yes.
So with that, can I ask if people are happy with the recommendations outlined in 10.1 and 10.2? All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. And I think that concludes the meeting. So I'm sorry we're a little bit late, 7 minutes past, but that has been a useful discussion on some very pressing points which are going to affect West Yorkshire bus and rail users in the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much. Goodbye.